All right, we're recording. So this is Danielle Zavala, and I have Stephanie Ramos here with me from the WISE program at NorCal MHA. Yes, and if you need to go ahead and mute yourself, feel free to do so. If you need to mute us, feel free to do so. I understand that you guys may have other things going on there at work. But we are here today to do a boundaries booster for the Fresno County peer staff. And back, I believe, in November, we came out to Fresno and Stephanie presented the ethics and boundaries training to the peer staff out there. And today we're coming back together to discuss any additional questions that you might have, to kind of revisit some of the information that was shared during the training, to address any specific questions or situations or scenarios that you're faced with, and how the information in this training may apply to that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And so I know, we know everyone pretty much in the room today. So I don't need you necessarily to announce, who you are and what your position is, and we all know who you work for. But I'm wondering if you could answer, if we can just kind of go around the room, or rooms, I guess, out there, and hear from you why you're interested in this booster training and what you hope to get out of it. So specifically, what are the scenarios that you need some help with or some guidance with? What issues have come up? What problems maybe have you encountered in the work that you're doing? That this, you would hope that we can address during the booster today. So if everyone can kind of just announce themselves and let us know what you would hope to get out of this, that would be great.
So Donnell, good morning. It's Joni.
Hi, Joni.
Hi. So really just kind of a refresher. I think I sent you a little bit in the email yesterday about information around the differences between a professional and a personal relationship, and the language piece. So that would be good for me to be reminded of those sorts of things.
Okay.
We appreciate you guys taking the time to be with us this morning. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you too. Happy Friday to everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend coming up. Okay, so I'm just kind of looking here. So some of the topics that Joni had pointed out that she would like us to discuss are, when to share your personal story, how much to share, how to skillfully, because we know that part of being a peer, one of the core competencies is learning how to skillfully share your lived experience and what that looks like, what that means. So we can talk about that. We can talk about separating work and home behaviors. What if you know somebody outside of your working relationship? What if you knew them before? How do you address situations where you know somebody personally or in different contexts? Conflicts of interest, and then language. So when we say language, Joni, if you could just clarify, are we talking about like strengths-based language and person-first language?
Yes, I'm speaking to that, and I'm also speaking to using people's names.
Okay.
And I know that it's been reported in the that sometimes, although endearing and done in a thoughtful way, the use of terms like sweetie and honey and baby may not be appropriate at work.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So anything else, any other issues that folks on this webinar would like us to address during the booster today? Come on, guys, you're on the call for did somebody just tell you you have to be on the call and that's why you're here? I'm hoping that you guys want to get something out of this. So I want to make sure that I address that so it's tailored to your needs. So now's your chance. Okay. All right, I'm going to move on. Okay, so Steph, if we are talking about Sorry, we're just kind of scrolling through the training, trying to find the slides that um, are most relevant to some of the issues that Joni has brought up. Let's see here. Okay, all right. So I'm going to fast forward here really quickly to some. That's number 21, right? Okay.
You can type in 21.
Oh, okay. See, I'm just learning things now. Okay, so I think this here would potentially address some of the issues that are coming up. So peers are respectful. So guideline number 5 is peers are respectful. They treat people with kindness, warmth, and dignity. So dignity, that's so kindness and warmth. Sometimes, depending on how like we've been brought up or how we were shown kindness and warmth and what we, especially, from different cultures and things like that, referring to somebody as sweetie or honey or baby, that might be a sign of affection, right? But I think that sometimes other people take it as, demeaning, even though we are not intentionally trying to demean anybody. And so that can create a situation where, the person that we're working with, when we really need to build that rapport, may think that we are talking down to them. Is that something that anyone has experienced, or have you run into a problem? Or they might think that we're a little bit more familiar with them than our job really allows us to be. So it could be creating a more casual type of relationship. It might be signaling to the person that we're working with that we're trying to create a more casual relationship than really we're intending. So any scenarios or situations that you guys have experienced around that?
So I just wanted to jump in and say that I'm very guilty of using terms of endearment. That's what I like to call them. And I think that often it's good intention, right? And when people have said things like that to me in the past, it's made me feel good or made me feel connected. And so sometimes I try to use that as a tool. But what I've realized in my own personal life with my nieces and nephews, like that's a completely acceptable and normal way to be talking to them. And yet, even myself in the last few years, when I've caught other people now as an adult calling me honey or sweetie or things like that, I actually start to get offended now. And before, when I was younger, it didn't really bother me so much. But now that I see that, as I've gotten older and I have at times younger people calling me honey and sweetie and, kind of blending that role and sometimes not necessarily having a relationship with someone where we really can kind of call out those specific names and find that way to connect with people might not always be the most effective way when we're working with folks in the workplace. And like Danielle mentioned, like, we're talking about ethics and boundaries. And sometimes by using those terms, we're kind of fuzzing that line a little bit. And people may think that, well, they're more connected to us than the other clients are because we call them those like sweet names. And so sometimes it can create some unintended expectations or consequences when we use those.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing I just wanted to point out, is one of the big parts about being a peer supporter is making sure that we're meeting people where they're at. So even if we personally don't mean any offense by it, we have to be mindful of how other people might take it. Because as Steph pointed out, Steph has a unique kind of perspective in the sense that she's always like been seen as the young one in the group. She was started out as a youth advocate. She kind of worked her way up to a managerial level position, but people still saw her as the youth in the room, and she's still kind of battling that, even 10 years after she started working here, she's still kind of treated sometimes like the kid in the room. And even though we might be trying to communicate, endearment or gentleness or, just trying to make people feel comfortable, we have to also keep in mind that to the other person, it may come across as patronizing, or it might reinforce a power differential between you and that other person. Because if someone's constantly calling Steph like sweetie and honey and sweetheart and baby, then she's going to be reminded that she's the youth in the room again, even though she's an adult now. So it's just, meeting people where they're at means anticipating how they might take it, even if we don't mean it that way. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And I want to encourage you guys, please, we need you to like verbally participate. Yeah, and I get it. I know put out the disclaimer that this is being recorded, and so maybe you don't want your voice recorded, and I'm sorry. I don't want to discourage anybody from participating, but this is going to be really boring for the people who are going back and watching this if we don't have a dialogue. So please feel free, like, I want this to be like we're in the room together, because I think that's how you're going to get the most out of it, and that's how the folks who watch this later will get the most out of it. Yes, Curtis, I can see your text. I understand. So your mic isn't working. I see that. But so I'm gonna read what Curtis is sharing with us. So he says he avoids using such terms. He keeps it professional to make sure that clear boundaries are set, which is great. There are other ways to commute kindness, warmth, and dignity, etc. So yeah, absolutely. So for folks out there who maybe kind of have it a habit to use those kinds of terms of endearment or those affectionate terms, has how do you feel about this, or what ways have you found to kind of avoid using those terms, especially when you're meeting people or working with them in a professional setting?
Hey, Danya.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Debbie.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi.
So I am very guilty of doing this. Um, you know me from
I
the
know.
past.
Okay, I was thinking of you the whole time.
It's and it's been brought to my attention. And I tend to play the mama, grandma, loving, kind person, and so I really had to, especially with certain clients that you build a rapport with, and so you think that you have that relationship, and it's okay when really it's still not okay.
Mhm.
And so I've had to really watch, and trust me, it's very hard for me to change my language, and change how I talk, because I tend to talk from the heart and my mouth sometimes gets in the way. So, but as a professional, I know that this is something that I really struggle with here at work, and I really struggle to try and keep those boundaries. And it actually, I kind of put a wall up and put a guard up now, to where, because I feel like I can't be me, which is fine. I can be me, but I still need to be that professional, and it is about them. And I would never, ever, ever mean to demean anyone by that. And so I do struggle with that, but I'm really trying to get better.
Yeah. And sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. It kind of just becomes
Exactly.
who we are and like our vernacular. It's just how we express ourselves. And, maybe if we're in the South, nobody would care, right? That's why I'm
That's right. Oh yeah,
alluding to the sense it's kind of a cultural thing, right? It wouldn't be,
exactly. It is.
yeah, yeah. So it wouldn't necessarily be a big deal. But yeah, it is kind of hard. And so, and I hear what you're saying, because sometimes when we're watching our language, especially when it's language that's so ingrained as to our own identity, how we see ourselves, and who we are as people, then we feel like we're almost going too far in the opposite direction, like you're being, rigid or guarded or something like that, because you're trying to watch what you say, but you don't really know how else to communicate those same feelings of openness and warmth and kindness and acceptance, so that can be
It's,
difficult.
it is very difficult. It's just because I feel like I got to watch my back. I got to make sure that I'm doing and saying the right thing. So yeah, it's difficult. It's been a challenge.
For sure, for sure, absolutely. So I think part of the other thing would be, sometimes we can go the other way, right? So, and our language with people could be around, oh, we grew up in the same neighborhood. Maybe we know the same people. We used to run in the same circles. So you might use terminology with them that isn't necessarily appropriate for the workplace or for the work that you're trying to do as a mentor to somebody who is working on their recovery, right? So, for instance, if you personally like used to like run around in a street gang or like be affiliated with like some neighborhood folks or something like that, that the person you're working with knows, and you kind of go back into like the language that you would use or terminology or topics that you would use, trying to build rapport, right? So you have good intentions, you're trying to build rapport, but you may be reminding them of a lifestyle that they're trying to leave behind. So that's kind of another way that we need to be, mindful of while we want to make a connection, we also don't want to be sending the message that, oh, there's nothing wrong. Like what they came to try and get over would get help getting over. We don't want to send the message that, oh, that lifestyle, if you're trying to get over it, is totally fine, because we know it's not healthy and productive for them, right?
And I know some of you in trainings before have talked about how, you do run into people that are from your neighborhood, that know you, that know your history, and that it can be really hard sometimes to kind of manage boundaries when we're in a workplace setting. And so I think not only, we don't want to necessarily remind them of what was and what they're trying to get away from, but at the same time, we also don't want them to think that we are still continuing that lifestyle while working in this role. And so, sometimes that expectation is there by the people that we may be familiar with. So it's important that we're really setting our boundaries, using that right language, kind of setting expectations way ahead of time so that we don't run into those types of conflicts that can come up when we're working.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, we're going to, so guideline 6, this is also, really topical. So, sorry, which bullet point are we? It's all of them, really, right? So we want to make sure, so kind of what we were talking about is alerting people to any practice, including the way they treat themselves, that's dehumanizing, demoralizing, or degrading. So, sometimes we hear people say like, oh, I was so stupid. Like, why did I ever do that? And you want to, I mean, I don't think any of us would encourage somebody to say, or agree with them when they say, oh, I'm so stupid or something like that, or I'm a failure, but we have to be mindful of when those things come up. It is kind of our job to jump in and say, no, life is a learning process. And so let's talk about this in a positive way. What did you learn from it? What will you do differently next time? Or maybe sharing aspects of your personal story that are relevant, that help them see that, no, setbacks are inevitable, and what is a setback? Come on, you guys know this. What's a setback?
It's a setup for a comeback.
Right. Yes, there you go. A setback is just a setup for a comeback, right? So, kind of reminding them, right, it's temporary, and that we all experience setbacks. It's part of being human. And, things happen and people start out at different places in their lives. But the point is that, when we're talking about recovery, we're trying to inspire hope that things can and do get better, and showing them ways.
And you'll see, like in the next bullet point, it says use language that's supportive, encouraging, inspiring, motivating, and respectful. And often when we get into a situation where we're seeing people dehumanize themselves or talk negatively about themselves, that's when we want to start calling them sweetie and honey and trying to make them feel better. And in reality, we should be using language that's supportive, encouraging, inspiring, motivating, and respectful. And so it's, again, like we have the same goal, but trying to use a different approach in order to get there.
Yeah. And I mean, let's acknowledge like what is one of the elephants in the room, right? It's really difficult as a peer when you are supposed to be relating to somebody on a more personal level, yet not creating a personal relationship with them. Not like a casual personal relationship with them, if that makes sense. So that can be, finding where those boundaries are can be really difficult, right? Yeah, because I mean, we don't want to be too formalistic because that's not who we are as peers. We are supposed to meet people where they're at. We're supposed to share relevant aspects of our story to inspire them, right? We're supposed to be supportive. We're supposed to kind of be there to help walk them through situations that they may not be, have the skills or have the resources to get through on their own. But at the same time, we're not their family. We're not their best friend, right? There has to be, some sort of professionalism that is in what we're doing, So it's very difficult to try and be on the same level as somebody else, but at the same time, remain professional, whatever professional means, right? So, any other comments or questions around this? I feel like we didn't give you, anything, any nugget that you could really hang your hat on, but just being mindful of it and trying to find that balance of how to address those types of issues, and just kind of being more aware of it so you can adjust your behavior accordingly, I think is helpful. All right. So, oh yeah. Oh, okay. And then, so using our story and advocacy to be an agent of positive change. So what did you want to say about that?
Oh, I thought I heard that get mentioned in the beginning about use of story. Maybe
I think, yeah, I think we did
I
actually.
think I heard about that. So we talked in our other trainings about skillfully telling your story. And I don't know if, obviously you are in peer roles, so you've probably had experience doing this. But I think, again, just, reminding ourselves about what skillfully telling our story is. And so avoiding the oversharing that we know sometimes happens because it's often comes from our own need to connect with other people. Making sure, what pieces of our story are we sharing? And we really should be focusing on our story of recovery, not necessarily focused on the war stories and the awful things that happened, but really kind of focusing on the light at the end of the tunnel so that the folks that we're working with are, when they hear our story, they're, seeing hope. They're not necessarily seeing someone else who is, set back from, life circumstances, but being able to move on and be successful in our roles. And then I just want to remind folks to really make sure that we're practicing our storytelling. Which parts of our story are we comfortable sharing? Which parts of our story are we not? What do we need to keep for ourselves? Because people in general, we're sworn to confidentiality. The people that we serve are not. And so anything that we share about ourselves, we need to be comfortable with that being public information because they very well may go out, to one of the wellness centers or back out into the lobby and talk to individuals about the exact things that we might have shared with them, when we were trying to connect with them. So we want to make sure that we're not only, protecting the client by not oversharing, by not triggering them, but also protecting ourselves so that we can, share our story in a way that's comfortable for us. It's safe. If it gets out, it's not going to cause any damage. But really, recognizing what are we comfortable with sharing? What do we need to keep for ourselves? And is there, what is the purpose of us sharing in that moment? Because I think many of us, myself included, when I first came on board, it was like, share your story. I kept getting pushed out there to share my story, but no one ever said how or what it looks like, how to use it as a tool rather than just to be talking. And so I think that that's something for us to remember is that sharing our story is a tool that we have, but sometimes we need a different tool. And so, knowing the time and the place and when it might be appropriate for somebody.
Yeah. And I think, like Steph was saying, is going back to what is the point of sharing our story? Well, the point of sharing our story and what sets peers apart from other, mental health practitioners is that the sharing of our story inspires hope. And hope is the catalyst of the recovery process, right? So, I've jokingly said in the past, if I'm going to try to lose weight, I'm going to go to somebody who has really struggled with losing weight and who has overcome it because what they're going to share with me is going to inspire hope. Like if they can do it, I can do it too. It's going to inspire practical pointers and tips and, ways to address maybe some of my challenges and barriers that I'm experiencing. Um, but it's also going to, expose me to a healthier lifestyle and all of that. And I'm going to feel a connection with somebody who, rather than someone who's been, a fitness guru all their life and is saying, oh, well, you're just lazy and you just need to get out there and do XYZ. I'm going to feel a connection that with somebody who really understands me, and it's going to inspire me to make the changes that are necessary in my life. So that's the reason that we share our story as peers. So if that's the reason, to inspire hope, and to help jumpstart the recovery process, then we have to be thinking to ourselves, before we share anything, why am I sharing this? Is this relevant? And is this helpful? Right? So, when I say, is it relevant? You know, if we haven't experienced, if they're talking about, I've been homeless, for 2 years now, and, I've had this issue and that issue, and we've never been homeless or we didn't have that issue, we wouldn't jump in and just share something about our own recovery journey that wasn't relevant to what they were experiencing. We need to find at least like the piece of shared experience. Maybe it's the fear of not knowing if you're going to be safe that night. That's something that we can share and say, I know what you're feeling. I was in a situation where I didn't feel like safe at night either, and that can be, really scary. But I'm not saying, oh, I didn't feel safe at night because I was in a, domestic violence situation and this happened and that happened. So we're sharing parts that are congruent with the person's life and the struggle that they're experiencing. We're not telling them our whole entire story. We're picking and choosing what portions of our story are relevant and inspiring, right? And that will actually be helpful. And that's where we have to kind of think about, yes, sharing our story is a pathway to making a personal connection with somebody, but we want the personal connection to be in the spirit of hope and inspiration, not in the spirit of, oh yeah, I know that guy, yeah, I remember that time that he robbed the liquor store or whatever. You don't want to you don't want your personal connection to be based on that, right? So I'm just wondering from your perspectives, if you can kind of jump in and tell me, like, what are some challenges that you've experienced around sharing your story? Come on, guys, we need you. Yeah, it might trigger someone. Yeah, absolutely. So that goes back into like, is this helpful? Right? And how much do I want to share? Do I want to go into details, or do I want to say, yes, I experienced that too, and speak about it in a more general sense so that you're building the connection, but you're not getting too deep in the weeds and getting lost in a place where we're focused on the negative rather than on the inspirational aspect of it, or overcoming what the experience has been. So yeah, making sure that we're not re-traumatizing or triggering somebody, or unintentionally sending the message that those negative experiences aren't so negative after all. So we have to find, that's a tightrope that we're walking as well. Sometimes it's hard not to relate to war stories and shared lived experience, although I try to keep it recovery centered. Yeah, absolutely. It can be really hard. And it can kind of trigger something in yourself too, that like, oh yeah, I want to share with them. Like, I've been through that. I want them to see how much that, I'm not pretending. They may see that I'm better now, but I want them to know that I was like that too. Okay, how far into that do you want to go?
Yeah, and sometimes it's like, wow, like that sounds really hard. I've been in a similar situation. That does not mean I now have to, dive in and tell them like exactly what happened in the situation and how somebody threw something and this person got angry and blew up. They don't always need the details. Sometimes it's just being able to put out there that you've been through something similar without having to go into, the war part of the story. But really being able to focus on the hope piece. Like if I'm sad, I'm not going to go watch like a sad movie. If I'm sad, I'm going to go watch some movie about hope or a comedy or something else that's going to refocus my energy. And so thinking that when we're sharing our story, we really want to make sure that we're not trying to help people continue to dwell in that place, but think about, okay, I can get out of this dark place. And sometimes it's saying, yes, I've been there too. And here's what helped me. Mm-hmm. Right? Or here are the supports that, were most valuable. Mm-hmm. And being able to kind of say yes and connect with them, but then kind of make that turn to where let's focus on hope and let's focus on what you can do, rather than on where we're stuck or what we feel that we can't do.
And, Steph brought up something earlier and I forget exactly like what she said, but, are we trying to meet our own need for connection? Or are we trying to meet a need that we have when we're sharing, or are we trying to actually use our sharing in the intended way to be therapeutic and recovery oriented? And so what I mean by that is that, a lot of times when we have the temptation to overshare or to go into the war stories or get deep in the weeds with them, it's because we may have our own unmet need for recognition or connection or something like that. So we need to be very introspective and figure out like what is triggering us to want to overshare. Are we feeling like we want validation? We want we want to connect with this person. Like, what is it that is making us feel that we need to overshare and dwell in this negative space with them, which we know, when we step back from it, is not helpful.
And this can be hard. And I think that we should acknowledge that, like, just as much as the individuals we're serving want someone to connect with, want someone to understand their story, want someone who gets it, we want that too. Mm-hmm. And so, like, when we find somebody in our lives, whether we're a friend, a family member, coworker, a client that we're serving, and they have a similar story, a similar experience, something that validates what we went through, it's very hard to keep that boundary, because even for us, we're like, wow, you get it. You've been there. Go right back at the client. And so we have that need for connection around this specific life challenge just as much as they do, because everybody isn't out in the street waving their flag like, come talk to me about your mental health story. It's a very specific population. And so when we get those opportunities or meet somebody who has such a similar story, it can be very difficult to kind of maintain that boundary and not want to connect with them on a deeper level than what's appropriate for what we do in the workplace.
Yep.
Danielle?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Hey, it's Debbie.
Hi.
Sometimes you don't have to say anything. Sometimes you can give them the resources and help them without even telling your story. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that is even more powerful than telling your story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because you can help them without really going into, yeah, I did this, you did that, going back and forth, and you focus on your own story, and you can meet them where they are and help them without even disclosing yourself.
Right. Yeah.
And that's powerful.
Mm-hmm. And so we have a comment from Curtis. If you know someone personally who's aware of your personal war stories and that person starts to share with other clients, how do you redirect them, if possible, to being more recovery-centered conversations?
Exactly.
So, yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. I kind of want to put out to you guys. I mean, I have some ideas, but I'd like to hear what you think. So if you're working, with a particular client or they work in a setting that you also work, or I'm sorry, they frequent a setting that you also work in, and they used to run around with you back in the day, or they ran around with some people who know you or something like that. They know your war stories and they start sharing your war stories with other clients. How can you redirect the conversation?
So I know that this can be really challenging, especially in, smaller knit communities where people are kind of running in the same circles. I think it's an important issue to address as early as possible. So like as soon as you know this person, you run into them for the first time there, or they tell you they're going there, and sometimes it's like a mutual conversation of, you're obviously getting medical care here. And there are lots of things I know about you that you may not want the clinical team or other people that you're working with to maybe know because it was in our past. And so, I really want to respect your confidentiality and privacy. And I hope that you can, respect my privacy and confidentiality since this is a workplace. And so hopefully, between us both having that agreement that, I won't necessarily put information out here that it's not relevant to your case and not aware of, and I hope that you can respectfully do the same thing for me. But those are things that you can catch early, but again, if they're already in there and this is already happening, that can be a challenging situation to have to redirect them at that point.
Yeah. And so if you did have to redirect them, maybe one of the ways that you could do it is kind of jump in and if you hear, I don't know how often we would actually hear them, sharing that information. If you overheard it, you could always jump in and say, yeah, it's true that, I used to be involved in that, but I'm a lot better now. And it was, I just took a step back and realized how damaging it was for my life. And these are the resources that I used to get on the right track, and then kind of walk away, from it. I mean, obviously you don't want it to allow it to go, unaddressed, because it could potentially impact others' view of you, and who you are as a person, if they only know, little tidbits about like what bad things happened to you in the past. But I think that we're always trying to model in a way that isn't shaming, right? So we have to put aside our need for justice and fairness and validation, and our frustration that, someone's sharing private aspects of our life with other people, to step in and kind of, find the positive spin on it, and be able to say, yeah, I was there. Like everything that person said is correct, but I'm not there anymore. And, it was really damaging, and I'm a lot better now. And here's how I got that way.
And I think it's important to call it out, as uncomfortable as that might be. So if that's happening, like I personally would meet with that person that's telling all my business to the world, and not say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing this, but say, oh, I heard from a few folks, you were sharing this information. So I really wanted to meet with you and sit down and tell you about my recovery story. And tell you what's been successful for me. Because not to say this person is a bully, but like a bully, if you can call it out and kind of change the dynamic and, take the lead in that moment and sit down and say, I really want to tell you more. You're not shaming them, but in a way they may be getting the hint and might kind of feel like maybe I shouldn't be saying anything, because you had an opportunity to call it out, but you also do it in a way that isn't attacking them or shameful, but kind of changing the dynamic and changing the story that they're getting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another way you can do that is to talk to them and tell them the impact that has on you, and say, look, I know that, you probably just really wanted to connect with some other people here, and you found that telling them about my past was a way to connect with them, but I want you to understand the impacts that it has on me. And it changes, I'm trying to do a job here, I'm trying to help people recover, and being reminded of that, or having people look at me in a different way because now they know all the details that I personally didn't divulge. It makes me sad, and it makes me feel like I can't be as effective as I would like to be at my job, because I'm wondering, what rumors have they heard about me, and so, because I'm very recovery oriented, I want to emphasize, the positive aspect of my story rather than the negative aspects. And so I would just appreciate that, you kept that information to yourself, or if you think that it's inspirational, ask me if you want to share my story with somebody else, because I know that's something that we as peers, we share the stories of other people if we have permission to do so, or if it's, anonymous enough that we can make a point without calling out who the person is, and using it and using their story in a helpful way. And so, maybe talking to them and saying, we use our stories in a helpful way, not in a way to be divisive or to take somebody down a peg or two, and I just want to ensure that we're on the same page, because I'm pretty sure you would feel the same way I did if someone was running around, divulging information about you when, you weren't in the best place in your life. Something like that. So it's not necessarily shaming them, it's just telling them like this has an impact on me and it's harmful to me and I don't want to feel, stigmatized based on information I didn't choose to share. All right. So, so we talked about oversharing personal stories, knowing when to share and when not to share. We talked a little bit about professional relationships and personal relationships and the difference. So I want to revisit that subject really quickly. I think the biggest thing is not to take on somebody as a client that you already have a personal relationship with. And that kind of dovetails into the whole, conflict of interest conversation. And the reason for that is, if I already know somebody outside of work and then they come into wherever I'm working to receive services and then I'm assigned to that individual, then, I may have a desire to focus on things that may not be relevant to their recovery. I might be more swayed or persuaded to do things that I don't necessarily find, as helpful or professional because I have a relationship with that person. That like they might ask me to bend the rules or bend my own ethical standards because I have a personal relationship with them. So we want to make sure that, if we know somebody, especially if they're a family member or, something like that, we refer them out to somebody else and kind of like take ourselves out of the services that they're receiving.
And I think another important piece with that is that when it's someone that we know outside of work, there is no clocking out.
Mm-hmm.
So when you leave work, we leave work. We're supposed to leave our work at home. Our work at work. And when we go home, if somebody knows us personally outside of work, they may be calling us in the evening. They may be calling us on the weekend to help them. They may want to come over to our house to deal with, whatever situation they might be dealing with. And so it's good for our own personal boundaries to be able to, have somebody that we know personally to be working with somebody else, because then they can leave work at work. And it creates a very difficult situation when we are telling people in our personal lives, no, I can't help you when it's on a weekend. And maybe if they weren't my client and they weren't in our system, I would be helping them on the evening, during the evenings and weekends. And so it really kind of takes that boundary away when we're working with individuals that we have a personal relationship with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And I would also say that, if you asked us in the abstract, like, is it fair for a client to be able to access us on the weekends or to get services or to get priority or to, monopolize our time more than anybody else? We're going to say, no, of course that's not fair. I need to give people the attention and what they deserve and not necessarily give them preferential treatment, but we know that it's very, sneaky and insidious when you have a personal relationship with somebody. You may not even realize that you're doing it. You may even want to give them preferential treatment. They might not even be asking you, but you might want, to help them jump the queue and have a leg up. And it's not fair to the other people who need services as well. So I think it's important that, obviously for our own well-being, for their own well-being, not giving them, the wrong impression that they have access to us 24/7, and also, for our own, boundaries. And for the other people that we're serving, for the fairness of other people we're serving, we need to be mindful that we're not working one-on-one with people that we already know or have relationships with outside of work. It also can create a conflict in the sense that you might think you know what's best for that person, and you might try to steer their recovery, and it becomes less client-driven and more driven by what you think is the right thing for them to do.
Right, because often we're going to have much more information about a person that we have a personal relationship with. And so we may be considering many more things in their life that they typically wouldn't have disclosed or somebody would not have known if they were working with a different person.
Mm-hmm. Or we might have a vested interest in the outcome. Maybe, let's say like we're working with a family member and they're trying to get out of an abusive situation, but we know that we're their only family member in town and that they're probably going to have to come live with us. So we might not give them the services that they need to get out of that situation because we're afraid they're going to come ask to live with us, right? So those are two separate issues, right? The services that are right for that person versus what we want that person to do and how those services may, in a roundabout way, impact us. And we can't always separate that out when we're so entrenched with, the person that we're supporting and providing services to.
And sometimes we actually raise our expectations for those people.
Mm-hmm.
And like we expect more from them, and that's really not fair to them either.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely. So does anyone have anything they want to share about that? About having knowing people from those types of situations, or having worked with somebody maybe that you already knew from your personal life. Okay. All right. So we're getting close to the end of the hour. And in looking at kind of the main topics that Joni had brought up, there were several of them. The first was oversharing personal story, knowing when to share and when not to share. I think we covered that. Would you agree? Okay. Work to work.
Yes.
Okay, great. Separating work and home behaviors and the difference. We kind of touched on that a little bit, in a way, I don't know if we got in as deep as you were hoping, but do you have any additional questions or situations that you want us to address as it relates to separating work and home and the behaviors between the two?
I think what you guys have covered has been really good information.
Okay, great. Okay, and then professional relationships and personal relationships and the difference. I think we definitely covered that. And conflicts of interest. We talked about that a little bit, right? And then language. So language, there were several things, obviously using identifying information. We talked about that a little bit. Calling someone, using terms of endearment when we're referring to people. We talked about that. Anything else that you want us to cover around language? About coworker relationships. Okay, so can you expand on that? What specifically are you, give me a scenario or a hypothetical around coworker relationships that, giving hugs. Okay. You can say a lot about giving hugs. I think, I think it's important that I'm kind of a no hugger at work kind of person, unless someone is like really, really going through a distressing situation. And there's a lot of traps for the unwary around giving hugs. First of all, who we choose to give hugs to and who we don't, and how we communicate to the person, that it's okay versus the person that it's not okay, can be problematic, right? If someone sees me giving hugs to Steph all the time, they might think I'm a hugger and think it's okay to give me a hug. How do I let that person down easily, without being rude or disrespectful? So that can be problematic. And even asking sometimes, I would always be an advocate of asking someone, can I give you a hug, before you give them a hug? But you can't always expect that they're going to answer honestly. They may feel, that it would be rude to say no, even though they don't want you to give them a hug. So I think it's just kind of better not to give hugs unless you really, really know that person very well.
And just to share, like, I'm a hugger. Poor Danielle, I'm a hugger. No one has ever turned a hug down from me until I started asking people if I could hug them. So think of all the people that I physically assaulted through my hug because I didn't ask them, and they didn't want to say no when I'm walking towards them with my arms out. But when I started asking, I've had a lot of people say I'm not really a hugger. And so I think that asking is important. I think Danielle brings up a good point. Like, with our clients, with our coworkers, if someone sees me hugging somebody, they may want a hug, and the person who wants a hug may actually be someone who makes me very uncomfortable. and I might not want to hug them. And so it can create an expectation. Other people may now have this expectation that they can just physically touch us, hug us, kind of be in our space, and that's not always comfortable. And so I definitely, like Danielle, discourage hugging in our personal lives. That's one thing, but at work and with our clients, I think it's not that hugs are bad; they're great. But within that environment, it's important that we're setting those clear boundaries to avoid really uncomfortable situations. Whether it be I'm uncomfortable because I'm hugging you and I don't want to, or I'm uncomfortable because now I have to explain to you why I don't want to hug you versus why I hugged 3 other people around you.
Right. Right. Fist bumps. Yes, I agree. Fist bumps are best. So, I mean, I guess like the rule of thumb would be, if you're a hugger, try not to hug at work because, people, no matter what you do, people are going to, it's just too perilous, right? There's just too many pitfalls around that. And if you insist upon hugging at work, make sure that, you're not hugging above or below your
Side hugs.
Well, side hugs. But what I was getting at is more like, don't try to hug your boss and don't try to hug your subordinate because that creates weird situations. If it's truly your equal playing field with your coworker, maybe it's okay, but I definitely wouldn't do it out in the open because then you're going to send the impression that you guys are huggers and that other people are welcome to give you hugs.
And what one person thinks is a long hug, someone else might think is a short hug. So even the people around us might become uncomfortable because they are trying to interpret what that is.
Right. Now, it's not to say, if something really tragic happened in someone's life and they had to come to work that day and they're sharing, I mean, look, there are always going to be these circumstances where it may be okay to do something like that. But as a general practice, it's probably not a good idea, and certainly not a good idea to do it in front of other people that may misinterpret the meaning of that hug. So how do y'all feel about that? All right. So I think we covered everything. I'm going to throw it out to you just one more time. Is there anything else you want to talk about during this webinar today? And as you think about it, as you go back and like start looking through the materials from this training and the handouts and all of that, if you have specific questions, obviously, that you can reach out to Stephanie or to myself, and we can schedule things like this, boosters. I think this is actually a fabulous idea because, we come in one day, we tell you all about something, and then, we don't expect that you're just going to know how to go out and implement all of this information. We get it. You have busy lives and you're doing other things and you may forget what you learned. It's hard unless it's reinforced. So I think this is a really great idea to have periodic boosters like this. I just want to make sure that when we do these things that we are giving you, information that's helpful and focusing on things that you really need. So the more feedback we get from you, the more helpful we can be. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar now, and I'm going to stop the recording. So if you, in fact, actually, I'll stop the recording now, and then I'll kind of let you guys ask any questions before I end the webinar. One second.